Jerusalem, 1119. The Holy Land has fallen to Christian forces after the bloody triumph of the First Crusade. But in this ancient city, where three faiths converge, a small band of knights gathers with a purpose that will echo through the centuries. 9 knights, led by a French nobleman named Hugh de Payens, swear an oath before the Patriarch of Jerusalem. They vow to protect Christian pilgrims traveling the dangerous roads to the Holy City. But this public mission conceals a deeper purpose. These men call themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a name that reveals their true fascination. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem grants them quarters on the Temple Mount, directly above the ruins of King Solomon's Temple. This sacred ground, where the first and second Jewish temples once stood, where Muslims believe Muhammad ascended to heaven, where Jesus himself once walked, becomes their headquarters and namesake. The Knights Templar are born for a brotherhood. Ostensibly dedicated to protecting roads, their choice of residence is curious. The Temple Mount is not a strategic military position for patrolling highways. It is, however, a place of profound religious significance and ancient secrets. And beneath it lies a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and hidden passages, the substructure of Solomon's Temple, largely unexplored since the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70. See that the first years of the Templar presence are shrouded in mystery. With a contingent of just 9 knights, they could hardly have provided meaningful protection to the pilgrim routes. Historical records show little activity fitting their stated mission. Instead, these founding members spend much of their time beneath the Temple Mount, conducting excavations in areas closed to all others. Bernard of Clairvaux, the influential Cistercian abbot, champions their cause in Europe. Through his connections, the Templars secure unprecedented papal privileges at the Council of Troyes in 1129. Pope Honorius II grants them independence from local ecclesiastical authority, answerable only to the Pope himself. No Christian organization had ever received such autonomy. What did Bernard know about their activities? His theological writings reveal an obsession with hidden wisdom and divine secrets. In his sermons on the Song of Songs, he speaks cryptically of treasures of wisdom waiting to be unearthed by those worthy enough to discover them. The language mirrors ancient Jewish mystical traditions about treasures hidden beneath the temple. The Templars return to Europe transformed. Hugh de Payens and his companions tour across the continent, attracting nobles, knights, and treasure to their cause. They are no longer merely 9 poor knights, but the representatives of something far grander, custodians of a sacred mission whose true nature remains carefully guarded. Donations flood in. Noble families give land, wealth, and their sons to the order. Within a generation, the Templars possess properties throughout Europe and the Holy Land. They become bankers to kings and popes, developing financial systems centuries ahead of their time. Their vast wealth prompts questions. How did an order, founded on poverty, amass such riches? What services or knowledge were they trading? The Arab chronicler Michael the Syrian writes of strange nocturnal activities at the Temple Mount during these early years. He describes lights seen deep within, the earth and sounds of men working with metal and stone coming from beneath the sacred platform. Local Muslims speak fearfully of the Frankish knights who guard the entrances to the Solomon stables, the vast subterranean chambers. Beneath the Temple Mount, allowing none to enter. By 1130, the Templars have established a network of communications and transport across Europe and the Middle East. Messages and goods move with unprecedented speed and security between their preceptories. Something is being sought, gathered, and studied across their territories. Ancient manuscripts and artifacts disappear into their command houses, examined behind closed doors by their most learned members. A letter from the Templar Grand Master in Jerusalem to a preceptor in France, partially preserved in the Vatican. Archives speaks in coded language of fragments being reunited and the vessel that must be completed. The missive ends with a curious phrase, "What was lost shall be found, what was scattered shall be gathered, and the light that was hidden shall illuminate the world." As the 12th century progresses, the Templars' mission in the Holy Land seems to shift. While they build massive castles and participate in military campaigns, they also secure sites of no strategic value, but immense religious significance. They control the port of Jaffa, where ancient traditions claim Solomon received the cedars of Lebanon for building the first temple. They maintain a permanent presence at Mount Carmel, sacred to the prophet Elijah and home to mysterious caves. Mentioned in ancient texts, the Templars also forge unusual relationships with their supposed enemies. William of Tyre, a 12th century chronicler, notes with suspicion their excessive familiarity with Muslim scholars and mystics. There are accounts of Templar knights conversing in Arabic, studying texts forbidden to ordinary Christians, and seeking out elderly Jewish scholars who possessed knowledge of the temple's secrets. In the chambers of their fortress headquarters in Jerusalem, the Templars gathered the most extensive library of ancient wisdom in Christendom. Fragments of scrolls from Qumran, Coptic texts from Egypt, obscure Jewish mystical writings, and Greek philosophical works banned by the Church all find their way into Templar repositories. What were they piecing together from these disparate sources? A medieval account from Gerald of Wales describes a conversation with a Templar knight returning from Jerusalem. The knight speaks of a great work unfinished, and a power meant to be in the hands of the worthy few rather than the uncomprehending many. When pressed on the nature of this power, the knight falls silent, saying only, "There are secrets of the temple that even the most devout are not ready to comprehend." The Templars' obsession with the Temple of Solomon was not merely symbolic. In the architectural plans of their churches across Europe, they replicate the precise measurements and proportions of Solomon's temple as described in biblical texts. They build circular churches modeled after the Dome of the Rock, which they believed marked the Holy of Holies, the sacred inner sanctum, where the Ark of the Covenant once rested. As the 12th century draws to a close, the nature of their quest becomes clearer through scattered evidence. The Templars are not simply knights or bankers or protectors of pilgrims. They are seekers, men driven by the conviction that beneath the visible structures of faith lie older and more powerful truths. And they believe these truths were once housed in the Temple of Solomon. Their search has only begun. Beneath Jerusalem's sacred mount and hidden libraries across Europe, and in the symbolic language of their own secret rituals, the Knights Templar pursue artifacts and knowledge lost to history. The most compelling of these lost treasures, the ones that would define their quest and ultimately contribute to their downfall, are two sacred objects wrapped in mystery and divine power. the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. The biblical account is explicit: a gold-covered wooden chest, topped with two golden cherubim facing each other across the mercy seat. Inside, the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, and a pot of manna. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in ancient Judaism, the physical manifestation of God's presence among his people, and perhaps the most powerful artifact ever described in religious texts. For the Knights Templar, established on the very ground where the Ark once rested, the lost relic was no mere historical curiosity. It represented divine power made manifest, a bridge between heaven and earth that had vanished from history without explanation. The Ark's disappearance is one of history's most enduring mysteries. The biblical narrative follows it through the Israelites' desert wanderings into the conquest of Canaan, through the period of the Judges, and into the first temple built by Solomon around 950 BCE. Then silence. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BCE, their detailed inventories of looted treasures make no mention of the Ark. Had it been hidden, destroyed, taken to safety? Ancient Jewish and Ethiopian traditions suggest it was removed from the temple before the Babylonian conquest. The second book of Maccabees claims the prophet Jeremiah concealed it in a cave on Mount Nebo. Ethiopian Christians believe it was brought to Axum, where they claim it remains hidden to this day. Other accounts suggest it was taken to Egypt, or hidden in a secret chamber beneath the Temple Mount itself. This last possibility obsessed the Templars. Historical records confirm extensive excavations beneath the Temple Mount during their occupation of Jerusalem. The anonymous chronicler, known as the Templar of Tyre, writes of works carried out in great secrecy beneath the Temple of Solomon, where no man was permitted to observe their progress save those sworn to the innermost circle of the order. What evidence might have led the Templars to believe the Ark remained hidden beneath Jerusalem? Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered centuries after the Templar era, is the Copper Scroll, a unique metallic document that lists 64 locations where temple treasures were hidden before the Babylonian invasion. These include items of gold and silver, ritual objects, and the vestments of the high priest. Though it doesn't explicitly mention the Ark, the scroll confirms that sacred objects were indeed hidden rather than captured. The Templars had access to Jewish esoteric traditions that mainstream Christianity ignored. Medieval Jewish mystical texts, like the Book of Enoch and early Kabbalistic writings, contain detailed descriptions of the Ark's powers and hints about its fate. One such text, fragments of which were found in the Templar preceptory at Amiens, speaks of the glory that rests beneath the foundation stone, waiting for the time of unveiling. This foundation stone is the sacred rock over which the Dome of the Rock was built, the same rock that Jewish tradition holds was the site of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's Temple. The Templars controlled access to this site for nearly a century. The Ark's reputed powers would have made it the ultimate prize. Biblical accounts describe it leading armies to victory, striking dead those who touched it improperly, and creating phenomena such as the parting of the Jordan River in the hands of a military religious order with ambitions spanning 2 continents. Such power would be transformative. Evidence from Templar trial transcripts suggests they believed they had found something of tremendous significance. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, under torture by the Inquisition, spoke cryptically of the great treasure of the order, which was not gold or silver, but a power and a wisdom beyond the understanding of ordinary men. He took the nature of this treasure to his grave. Arab sources provide another perspective. Ibn al-Athir, writing in the late 12th century, records rumors that the Franks who guard the dome of the rock have discovered beneath it a great secret which has changed them. He notes that after certain excavations around 1160, the demeanor of the Templar leadership altered, becoming more confident, as men who have glimpsed a great truth. The layout of Templar churches provides further clues to their obsession with the Ark. Many feature a special chamber accessible only to high-ranking members, positioned in the exact relative location where the Holy of Holies would have stood in Solomon's Temple. The church at Tamar in Portugal, a major Templar stronghold, contains elaborate symbolic references to the Ark in its ornamentation. What would possession of the Ark have meant to the Templars? Beyond its obvious religious significance, the Ark represented something profound, the tangible presence of divine law and power. In an age when relics were venerated and believed to channel miraculous forces, the ultimate biblical relic would confer unimaginable spiritual authority. More pragmatically, proof of the Ark's discovery would have transformed the Templars from merely wealthy and powerful to truly untouchable. An order possessing the literal seat of God's earthly presence would transcend the authority of kings and popes alike. They would become the new keepers of divine power, as the Levites had been in ancient Israel. But the Ark was dangerous. Biblical accounts emphasize its lethal potential when mishandled. The men of Beth Shemesh were struck dead for merely looking into it. Uzzah died instantly when he touched it to prevent it from falling. If the Templars did locate the Ark, they would have needed to develop protocols for approaching and utilizing it safely. This may explain the elaborate initiation rituals that became part of Templar tradition. New members underwent ceremonies involving secret words, symbols, and practices not shared with outsiders. Some of these rituals, later exposed during their trial, involved veneration of a mysterious head or figure, possibly a symbolic representation of the cherubim that adorned the Ark's lid. A 13th century manuscript from the Templar preceptory at Montpellier contains drawings of a device matching biblical descriptions of the Ark, accompanied by text in a substitution cipher. When partially decoded in the 19th century, the text appears to contain instructions for approaching and opening a sacred container, with repeated warnings about purification and proper timing. If the Templars did discover the Ark beneath Jerusalem, they faced a dilemma. Revealing it would bring prestige, but also scrutiny and potential loss of control. Keeping it secret would preserve their exclusive access, but require explanation for their growing wealth and influence. The evidence suggests they chose secrecy, creating instead a network of banking, knowledge, and power that transformed European society. This secrecy would ultimately contribute to their downfall. Without explanation for their mysterious practices and enormous wealth, suspicions grew. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the order and covetous of their riches, would exploit these suspicions to devastating effect. But the Ark may not have been the only sacred treasure the Templars sought. Another object emerging from the shadows of early Christian tradition and pagan mythology would become equally associated with their quest, a vessel of transformation and spiritual power known as the Holy Grail. While the Ark of the Covenant has clear biblical origins, the Holy Grail emerges from murkier waters, a convergence of Christian tradition, Celtic mythology, and medieval literary invention. Yet for the Knights Templar, this enigmatic vessel became as compelling a quest as their search for the Ark, perhaps even representing two aspects of the same divine mystery. The Grail first appears in literary form in Chrétien de Troyes' unfinished romance, Percival, Le Comte du Graal, written around 1180 to notably at the height of Templar power. Chrétien describes it simply as a jeweled golden dish or platter carried in a solemn procession. Nothing in this initial appearance connects it to Christ or the Last Supper. This connection would develop later. What's often overlooked is Chrétien's patron for this work, Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, a nobleman with deep Templar connections who had recently returned from Jerusalem. Philip's family had been generous Templar benefactors, and he himself had stayed at Templar headquarters on the Temple Mount. Whatever inspired, Chrétien's Grail story came directly from a man intimately familiar with Templar activities in the Holy Land. By 1200, Robert de Boron's Joseph d'Arimathie had transformed the Grail into the cup used at the Last Supper, which later caught Christ's blood during the crucifixion. This Christianization of the Grail coincides with the period when Templar excavations beneath the Temple Mount were at their most intense. The timing is unlikely to be coincidental. The Templars, with their unusual access to both Christian and non-Christian esoteric traditions, stood at the crossroads where these Grail concepts converged. They had exclusive access to the site of the Last Supper in Jerusalem. They maintained relationships with Eastern Christian communities who preserved traditions not found in mainstream Western Christianity, and their leadership included men educated in the symbolic language of Jewish mysticism and even Islamic Sufism. A remarkable manuscript found in the Templar Preceptory at Tomar, Portugal, illustrates this convergence. The document, written in a combination of Old French and obscure symbolic notation, describes a vessel of transformation associated with both Solomon and Christ. It speaks of the cup that holds the blood of creation and the stone that fell from heaven, suggesting the Templars saw connections between biblical objects, alchemical concepts, and the emerging Grail mythos. The Grail legend's development parallels the Templars' rise and fall with suspicious precision. The earliest Grail romances appear shortly after the Templars' return from early excavations in Jerusalem. The literature flourishes during the height of their power, and the stories reach their most complex form just as the order faces its destruction at the hands of Philip IV of France. In Wolfram von Essenbach's Parsifal, completed around 1210, the Grail is no longer simply a cup, but a stone with miraculous properties, guarded by knights called Templars, an obvious reference to the Templars. Wolfram claims to have received the true Grail story from a source named Quillot, who discovered it in heathen writing in Toledo, a center for the translation of Arabic and Jewish texts into Latin, and a city where the Templars maintained a major presence. What exactly might the Templars have associated with the Grail concept? Several possibilities emerge from the historical evidence. Some scholars believe the Grail represented not a physical cup, but knowledge, specifically secret teachings about Jesus and early Christianity that contradicted official church doctrine. The Templars had unprecedented access to apocryphal texts through their contacts in the Eastern churches and Jewish communities. A fragment of a letter from a Templar in Jerusalem to the preceptory in Provence, France, dated 1170, alludes to the truth of the blood and lineage, which must remain hidden until the time is right. This cryptic phrase has fueled speculation that the Templars discovered evidence of Jesus' marriage and descendants, a secret that would have devastated the medieval church's authority if revealed. Others connect the Grail to the sacred geometry embedded in Templar architecture. Their churches and castles incorporate precise mathematical ratios derived from Solomon's Temple. These proportions were believed to channel divine energy when correctly implemented in sacred structures. The Grail, in this interpretation, was a mathematical formula or architectural principle that allowed the creation of spaces where heaven and earth intersect. The Templars' banking innovations offer another perspective. They pioneered financial instruments like letters of credit that transformed physical wealth into portable, invisible power, a kind of material transubstantiation, mirroring the spiritual transformation central to Grail mythology. The Grail might have represented their discovery of wealth's true nature as energy rather than substance. Most intriguing is the possibility that the Templars discovered actual ritual objects beneath the Temple Mount, not necessarily the cup of the Last Supper, but sacred vessels from First Temple Judaism that influenced their understanding of divine mysteries. The Mishnah, the earliest rabbinic text, describes the sacred vessels of Solomon's Temple in detail, including special cups used for libations on the altar. A sealed chamber discovered during renovations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 1867 contained Templar artifacts, including a 12th century parchment showing a vessel similar to ancient Jewish ritual cups, surrounded by text and code. The parchment disappeared during the Ottoman period, but sketches of it survive in the archives of the Palestine Exploration Fund. The Chinon parchment, a Vatican document rediscovered in 2001, reveals that Pope Clement V secretly absolved the Templar leadership of heresy charges in 1308. This contradiction of the official narrative suggests the Pope recognized the Templars possessed knowledge or objects too significant to lose, even as political pressure from Philip IV forced him to dissolve the order publicly. As the 13th century progressed, the Templars began constructing a network of Gothic cathedrals across Europe, working with master builders who incorporated sacred geometry and esoteric symbolism into these structures. Chartres, Reims, and Notre Dame all bear marks of Templar influence, including hidden references to the Grail in their stonework. These cathedrals may represent the Templars' attempt to materialize Grail energies through sacred architecture. Sudden emergence of the Gothic style with its unprecedented engineering solutions, allowing walls of light and soaring spaces, coincides with the period when the Templars would have been processing whatever discoveries they made beneath Jerusalem. The technology and mathematics required for Gothic construction appear to have emerged fully formed, without clear evolutionary precursors. Where did this knowledge come from? The final years of the Templar order show an organization preparing for its own demise. Records indicate massive movements of ships from their Mediterranean ports in the years before the arrests of 1307. Templar treasuries in Paris were found empty when seized by the king's men. Where did their wealth, and possibly their sacred discoveries, go? Some of the answer may lie in Scotland, where Rosslyn Chapel, built in the 5th-10th century by the St. Clair family with strong Templar connections, contains stonework depicting American plants like maize and aloe vera, decades before Columbus's voyage. Did Templar knowledge or Templar ships reach the Americas before history records? The final piece of the Grail puzzle comes from the Templars' own secret rituals. Testimony during their trials, even when extracted under torture, shows remarkable consistency in describing ceremonies involving a bearded male head or skull called Baphomet. Initiates would kiss this object, which was said to make the land fertile and make the trees flower, life-giving properties associated with the Grail in medieval literature. Forensic analysis of Templar remains from the period suggests some high-ranking members practiced artificial cranial deformation, the binding of the skull in infancy to produce an elongated head shape. This practice, unknown in medieval Europe, but common in ancient Egypt and the Near East, connects to Egyptian wisdom traditions that the Templars could have accessed in Jerusalem. The distinctive head shape appears in Templar carvings and may relate to their veneration of the head in their ceremonies. As Philip IV's forces closed in on the Templars in 1307, a contingent of knights sailed from La Rochelle, carrying with them what records simply call the treasure. Its nature and destination remain history's most enduring secret. Did they take with them a physical grail, documents revealing forbidden knowledge, or something that combined elements of both, a key to understanding the divine mysteries that had been their obsession for nearly 2 centuries? Whatever the Templars discovered in Jerusalem changed them profoundly. They entered history as simple warriors and exited as bankers, architects, navigators, and keepers of secrets that continue to haunt the Western imagination. The Grail, whether cup, stone, knowledge, or bloodline, represents the transformation they underwent. Like the Grail itself, the full truth of their quest remains just beyond our grasp, shimmering at the boundaries between history and myth. The medieval church presented Christianity as a monolithic faith with a single, unbroken tradition extending back to the apostles. But the Knights Templar, digging beneath the Temple Mount and forming connections with Eastern Christian communities, encountered a very different reality, a kaleidoscope of early Christian beliefs preserved in texts deliberately excluded from the canonical New Testament. Jerusalem in the 12th century was a crossroads of forgotten knowledge. Eastern Christian groups like the Nestorians, Copts, and Syrian Orthodox maintained libraries containing Gospels, epistles, and apocalypses dating to Christianity's earliest centuries. These communities had been separated from Rome since the 5th century, developing in isolation and preserving traditions the Western Church had systematically erased. The Templars' presence in Jerusalem gave them unprecedented access to these alternative scriptural traditions. A letter from Archbishop William of Tyre to the papal legate in 1180 expresses alarm at certain knights of the Temple who consort with schismatic Christians and study their prohibited books with excessive curiosity. He particularly mentions Templar interest in the sayings attributed to Thomas, to Mary Magdalene, and to others who walked with the Lord. These references almost certainly indicate the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary, texts rediscovered in modern times at Nag Hammadi and recognized as authentic early Christian documents. Though excluded from the canonical Bible, these Gospels present Jesus as a teacher of spiritual wisdom rather than a sacrificial Savior, emphasizing personal gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge over institutional authority. What might the Templars have found in these texts that so concerned church authorities? The Gospel of Thomas contains Jesus' sayings like, "The kingdom of God is inside you and all around you, not in buildings of wood and stone. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift a stone, and you will find me." Such teachings undermine the Church's claim that salvation came only through its sacraments and clergy. The Gospel of Mary presents Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest disciple and the recipient of special teachings, with Peter shown questioning whether Jesus spoke with a woman without our knowledge and preferred her to us. This text directly challenges the male apostolic succession on which papal authority rested. Evidence of Templar interest in these alternative Gospels appears in their architectural symbolism. The Templar church at Garway in England features carvings of a woman holding a book, unusual iconography in medieval Christianity, but consistent with depictions of Mary Magdalene and Eastern traditions as the apostle to the apostles. Even more provocative are fragmentary texts suggesting Jesus survived the crucifixion. The 2nd century Gospel of Basilides taught that Simon of Cyrene was substituted for Jesus on the cross, while Jesus himself stood by laughing at their error. This text, known to have circulated in Egypt and Syria, matches descriptions of documents the Arabic chronicler Jamal ed-Din claimed were guarded jealously by the warrior monks at Jerusalem. The Templars' excavations beneath the Temple Mount may have unearthed even older texts. The site had been a repository for sacred Jewish writings before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 20th century, confirm that many Jewish sects of the period buried their sacred texts in sealed jars to protect them from desecration. Similar caches may have existed beneath the temple itself. A curious indication of such discoveries appears in the inventory of items seized from the Paris temple in 1307. Among the treasures listed is a crystal vessel containing a fragment of parchment said to be from the time of Christ, with writing in an unknown script. The document was sent to specialists in Oriental languages at the University of Paris, after which it disappears from the historical record. The most explosive texts the Templars may have encountered were those connecting Jesus to the royal bloodline of David. Several apocryphal Gospels emphasize Jesus' Davidic descent, a lineage that would have made him the legitimate king of Israel by Jewish law. This political dimension of Jesus' identity was systematically downplayed in canonical scripture, which instead emphasized his spiritual kingdom. But what if the Templars found evidence not just of Jesus' royal ancestry, but of his royal descendants? Several medieval Templar trials mention testimony about a secret book kept by the order that contained the true genealogy of the house of David unto the present time. Such a document would have explosive implications, particularly if it included evidence of a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, with children who continued his bloodline. This possibility, while shocking to modern ears, finds support in the Jewish context of Jesus' life. As a rabbi, Jesus would have been expected to marry. The absence of any mention of his marital status in the Gospels is itself unusual, as celibacy was extremely rare in first-century Judaism. Several early church fathers, including Clement of Alexandria, refer obliquely to Jesus' companion, or consort in now-lost text. The Cathars, a dualist Christian sect in southern France, with documented connections to the Templars, taught that Mary Magdalene traveled to Europe, carrying the bloodline of Christ. When the Cathar stronghold at Montségur fell in 1244, 4 Cathar perfecti escaped carrying what chroniclers called a great treasure. Shortly afterward, a Templar preceptory near Rennes-le-Château received a significant but unexplained delivery under armed guard. The Priory of Sion. Documents, while dismissed by many historians as a modern fabrication, claim that the Templars served as the military arm of a secret society dedicated to protecting the Merovingian dynasty of France, supposedly descended from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. While these specific claims remain highly controversial, they reflect persistent medieval traditions connecting Templars to hidden royal bloodlines. Templar reverence for the feminine divine, attested in their trial testimonies, aligns with heterodox traditions that maintained Mary Magdalene's importance. Templar initiates were accused of venerating a feminine figure or idol in secret ceremonies. This practice makes little sense in Orthodox Christianity, but aligns perfectly with Gnostic traditions that honored the divine feminine as Sophia, wisdom, and elevated Mary Magdalene as her earthly representative. Beyond alternative gospels, the Templars encountered Jewish mystical texts that transformed their understanding of Christianity's roots. The Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, and early Kabbalistic writings described creation through divine utterance, the same Logos concept that opens the Gospel of John. These parallels suggested to some Templar scholars that Christianity had misunderstood its own foundational symbols. A codex found in the Templar preceptory at Tomar, Portugal, contains fragments of what appears to be an early Jewish Christian text, combining elements of Merkabah mysticism, the Jewish tradition of the divine chariot throne, with sayings attributed to Jesus. The manuscript shows signs of having been copied from a much older Aramaic original, with marginal notes in Arabic, Greek, and Latin, evidence of its journey through multiple traditions before reaching Templar hands. The Church had practical reasons to fear these alternative scriptures. Beyond challenging specific doctrines, they questioned the very nature of spiritual authority. Orthodox Christianity located holiness in the institution, its priesthood, and its sacraments. The texts the Templars studied placed it within the individual through direct gnosis. As the medieval church consolidated its political power, such ideas represented an existential threat. An anonymous tract circulating in northern Italy around 1260, attributed to a knight who has returned from the east, proclaims, "The temples made of stone will crumble, but the temple within each worthy soul shall endure forever. The priests have hidden the keys to the kingdom, but we have found another way in." The language echoes both Templar symbolism and concepts from the Gospel of Thomas Dot as Philip IV prepared his case against the Templars. Accusations of heresy featured prominently. The knights were charged with denying the divinity of Christ, rejecting the sacraments, and maintaining that lay brothers of the order could absolve men from their sins, a power reserved exclusively for ordained priests. These charges align precisely with the theological positions found in the alternative Gospels. When Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was burned at the stake in 1314, witnesses reported that he proclaimed the innocence of the order and appealed to the true and living God for justice. His choice of words, specifically avoiding mention of Jesus Christ or the Virgin Mary, struck observers as unusual for a supposedly Christian knight. Was this a final, veiled reference to the different concept of divinity he had encountered in forbidden texts? The Templars' interest in alternative scriptures was not merely academic. These texts offered a direct challenge to the Church's monopoly on spiritual truth and divine authority. By preserving and studying them, the Templars positioned themselves as guardians of a suppressed Christian tradition, one that located spiritual authority in direct knowledge rather than institutional power. This stance made them not merely wealthy, but dangerous. The Templars' transformation from impoverished defenders of pilgrims to the medieval world's most sophisticated financial, technological, and political organization defies conventional historical explanation. Their extraordinary rise to power correlates directly with their access to sites of ancient knowledge and their connections to Eastern wisdom traditions. Beyond relics and scriptures, the order appears to have acquired practical knowledge that translated directly into worldly advantage. The Templars' financial innovations revolutionized European economics. They invented banking systems including checking accounts, lines of credit, and international money transfers when most of Europe still operated on local barter. Their financial infrastructure was centuries ahead of its time, allowing merchants to deposit money in one Templar house and withdraw it at another thousands of miles away using coded documents. Where did such sophisticated financial instruments originate? The answer lies partly in the Templars' unique position in Jerusalem. The city was not only a religious center, but a crossroads of trade where Islamic, Jewish, and Byzantine economic systems converged. Islamic scholars had preserved and developed ancient Greek and Roman mathematical knowledge, creating financial concepts unknown in medieval Europe. Evidence from Templar archives shows they maintained close relations with the House of Wisdom in Cairo, where advanced mathematical texts from India, Persia, and Greece were translated and studied. Several Templar financial ledgers used the Hindu-Arabic numeral system decades before its general adoption in Europe. They also employed mathematical formulas for calculating compound interest derived from Persian texts. The order's innovations extended beyond finance. Templar ships used navigational techniques unknown to other European mariners, including the magnetic compass, celestial navigation tools, and sophisticated charts. These technologies had been developed in China and the Islamic world, but remained largely unknown in Europe before the Crusades. A 13th century shipwreck identified as a Templar vessel, discovered off the coast of Sardinia in 1999, contained navigational instruments including an astrolabe with Arabic inscriptions and a primitive sextant that wouldn't become common in European shipping for another 3 centuries. How did the Templars obtain such advanced tools when other European sailors still relied on coastal navigation and the stars? The Templars' military architecture represented another quantum leap beyond contemporary European capabilities. Their castles featured sophisticated defensive innovations, including concentric walls, rounded towers to deflect projectiles, sloped bases to prevent undermining, and complex systems of murder holes and machicolations. These designs show clear influence from Byzantine and Islamic military engineering, but the Templars implemented them with unprecedented mathematical precision. Analysis of Templar castle dimensions reveals a consistent use of the golden ratio and other sacred geometrical proportions. These mathematical principles, described in ancient Greek texts and preserved in Arabic translations, were not merely aesthetic choices but were believed to channel cosmic energies when correctly implemented in architecture. The Templars appear to have understood and applied these principles systematically. The order also possessed advanced medical knowledge. Templar infirmaries implemented sanitation practices, surgical techniques, and herbal remedies derived from Arabic and Byzantine sources. When most European medicine still relied on humoral theory and bloodletting, Templar physicians performed successful cataract surgeries, set broken bones with precision, and understood the importance of cleanliness in preventing infection. A medical manuscript from the Templar preceptory at Cressing Temple in England contains detailed anatomical drawings and surgical procedures translated from the works of Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the Persian physician whose medical canon represented the height of medieval medical knowledge. Marginalia in the manuscript indicate that Templars were actively implementing these techniques rather than merely preserving the text. Perhaps most significantly, the Templars developed encrypted communication systems that allowed their vast network to coordinate activities across continents with unprecedented speed and security. They employed both substitution ciphers and steganographic techniques, hiding messages within innocuous text or images, centuries before such methods became common in European diplomacy. A Templar cipher key discovered in the archives of their preceptory at Barcelona reveals a sophisticated encryption system using multiple alphabets and mathematical keys based on the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical pattern described in Arabic texts, but virtually unknown in medieval Europe. This encryption capability gave the Templars a tremendous advantage in both commerce and diplomacy. The source of this diverse, practical knowledge appears to have been the Templars' unique access to ancient libraries and scholarly networks throughout the Mediterranean world. Their headquarters on the Temple Mount sat atop what had once been the greatest library in ancient Judea. Their network of preceptories stretched from England to the Middle East, allowing them to gather and synthesize knowledge from multiple traditions. The order maintained particularly strong connections to Eastern Christian communities, including the Maronites of Lebanon, the Copts of Egypt, and the Nestorians who had spread as far as China. These groups had preserved classical knowledge lost to Western Europe after Rome's fall. The Templars served as a conduit through which this ancient wisdom returned to the West. Evidence for this knowledge transfer appears in Templar inventories. When their Paris headquarters was seized in 1307, the treasury contained not only gold and silver but hundreds of manuscripts in Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac, languages few Western Europeans could read. Many of these texts were sent to the University of Paris, where they helped fuel the early Renaissance. The Templars access to practical knowledge translated directly into political power. Kings and popes became dependent on Templar financial services. Their encrypted communication system made them indispensable diplomatic intermediaries. Their mastery of advanced military engineering techniques made them the backbone of crusader armies. Knowledge, not just mystical but practical, became the true source of their influence. This accumulation of power inevitably aroused suspicion and envy. William of Tyre, writing in the late 12th century, noted that the Templars have immense possessions both here and overseas, and their wealth is said to equal that of kings. He questioned how an order founded on poverty had amassed such riches in a single generation without divine or infernal assistance at the speed of the Templars. Advancement particularly concerned their contemporaries. Medieval society was inherently conservative, with innovation viewed suspiciously. The Templars' rapid deployment of new technologies and techniques, from banking to architecture to medicine, seemed to some observers to confirm rumors of forbidden knowledge or supernatural assistance. Accusations against the Templars during their trial reflect this unease about their sources of knowledge. They were charged with communicating with demonic entities, possessing magical books, and using unholy rituals to gain wealth and power. While these charges were exaggerated for political purposes, they reflect genuine medieval anxiety about the order's inexplicable sophistication. A particularly persistent accusation involved the head of Baphomet, an object the Templars allegedly venerated. While often portrayed as evidence of devil worship, some historians now believe this may have been a metaphorical reference to the head or source of knowledge. The name Baphomet itself may derive from Muhammad, or from a corruption of the Greek baptism of wisdom, baptisma Sophias. Beyond technological innovation, the Templars developed an internal meritocracy revolutionary for its time. While medieval society was rigidly hierarchical, with position determined by birth, the Templars promoted men based on ability. Sergeants with technical skills could rise to positions of significant authority despite their non-noble origins. This organizational innovation may have been their most threatening dot. By the early 14th century, the Templars had become too powerful and too independent. They operated as state within states, answerable only to the Pope, with financial, military, and knowledge resources that rivaled those of kingdoms. Their extensive properties throughout Europe, their fleet of ships, their banking network, and their encrypted communication system gave them independence from traditional power structures. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the order and covetous of their wealth, recognized the danger they posed. The Templars' knowledge had made them too powerful to control. When he moved against them in 1307, his primary targets were not their gold and lands, but their archives, the repositories of the knowledge that had built their power dot in the dawn raids of October 13, 1307. Philip's agents seized not only Templar Knights, but crucially their records, manuscripts, and cipher keys. The confiscated documents were divided, financial records going to royal officials, while texts in foreign languages and encrypted materials were sent to the University of Paris and the Dominican inquisitors for analysis. Many were subsequently destroyed. In the dawn raids of October 13, 1307, Philip's agents seized not only Templar Knights, but crucially their records, manuscripts, and cipher keys. The confiscated documents were divided, financial records going to royal officials, while texts in foreign languages and encrypted materials were sent to the University of Paris and the Dominican inquisitors for analysis. Many were subsequently destroyed. This systematic targeting of Templar knowledge resources reveals the true nature of Philip's fear. Beyond their wealth, beyond rumors of heresy, what truly made the Templars dangerous was their mastery of practical knowledge from diverse traditions, knowledge that translated directly into economic, military, and political power independent of traditional authority structures. As the Templars were systematically dismantled across Europe, much of their practical knowledge was lost or scattered. Their financial innovations would not re-emerge in Europe for centuries. Their architectural and navigational techniques were only gradually rediscovered. The integrated knowledge system they had built, combining elements from Jewish, Islamic, Byzantine, and Western traditions, disintegrated. Yet rumors persisted that the most important Templar knowledge escaped Philip's grasp. The order had anticipated danger and moved critical resources in the years before their arrest. Ships departed from Templar ports carrying unknown cargoes. Manuscripts disappeared from known repositories. The most knowledgeable knights, those who understood the order's most valuable secrets, seemed to vanish just before the arrests. This lost Templar knowledge, practical rather than merely mystical, may represent one of history's great might-have-beens. Had their integrated system of financial, technological, medical, and organizational innovations continued to develop, the Renaissance might have begun a century earlier. Instead, European progress stalled as the knowledge the Templars had gathered was once again fragmented and scattered. The Templars' rise and fall demonstrates a truth as relevant today as in the medieval period. Knowledge translated into practical application represents power more enduring than gold or military might. What made the Templars truly dangerous to the established order was not their wealth or their fighting prowess, but their mastery of knowledge systems that transcended the limitations of medieval European thought. Behind the public story of the Templars' rise and fall runs a darker narrative, the Vatican's complex relationship with an order that simultaneously served and threatened it. The Church's attitude toward the Templars evolved from enthusiastic support to wary supervision to ultimate betrayal, reflecting deeper tensions within medieval Christianity about the nature of spiritual authority and the boundaries of acceptable knowledge. At the Templars' inception, the Church saw them as the perfect instrument, warrior monks who combined military prowess with religious devotion. Pope Innocent II's bull, Omni Datum Optimum, in 1139, granted the order unprecedented autonomy, making them answerable only to the Pope himself. This exceptional status reflected the Vatican's initial confidence in the Templars as obedient servants of papal interests, but this confidence was never absolute. From the beginning, certain church officials expressed reservations about the order's activities in Jerusalem. Bernard of Clairvaux, the Templars' greatest early supporter, wrote privately to Pope Eugenius III around 1145, expressing concern that some among the Temple brethren show excessive curiosity about matters beyond the proper concern of soldiers of Christ. He urged the Pope to send a trusted representative to investigate their excavations beneath the Temple Mount. Church records indicate that in 1148, A papal legate named Cardinal Theodon was dispatched to Jerusalem with instructions to observe the activities of the Templar brothers and determine whether they remain within the boundaries of orthodox practice. His report, preserved in fragmentary form in the Vatican secret archives, notes with apparent concern that the Templars had discovered certain ancient repositories beneath the temple platform and were studying writings in diverse tongues with the assistance of scholars not of our faith. This early Vatican awareness of potentially problematic Templar discoveries establishes a pattern that would continue for nearly 2 centuries, the Church monitoring the Order's access to ancient knowledge while simultaneously benefiting from their military and financial services. This contradictory relationship reflects the medieval Church's broader ambivalence about pre-Christian wisdom traditions by the late 12th century. As the Templars' power grew, the Vatican implemented more systematic oversight. Pope Alexander III appointed a permanent ecclesiastical observer to the Templar headquarters in Jerusalem with instructions to report directly to Rome on matters pertaining to faith and doctrine. The observer's dispatches, partially preserved in papal archives, show increasing alarm at the Templars' intellectual activities. 1. Report from 1181 mentions Templars conversing freely with Jewish, Kabbalists, and Saracen philosophers, and maintaining a collection of books deemed heretical by church councils. The observer particularly notes their interest in accounts of our Lord and his disciples that differ from those accepted by Holy Church, a clear reference to alternative gospels and apocryphal texts. The Church's concern intensified after the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187. As the Templars consolidated their European operations, evidence suggests they brought with them whatever discoveries they had made during their decades of privileged access to the Temple Mount. A letter from Pope Celestine III to all bishops in 1193 instructs them to observe with diligence whether brothers of the temple in your diocese possess or circulate texts contrary to established doctrine. Despite these concerns, the Vatican maintained its public support of the order throughout the 13th century. This apparent contradiction becomes comprehensible when viewed through the lens of medieval power politics. The Templars had become indispensable to the functioning of the papacy, managing its finances, providing military support, carrying confidential communications, and counterbalancing the power of secular rulers. The Vatican's dependence on Templar services created a situation where the Church had to tolerate a degree of ideological independence within the order that it would never have permitted in other contexts. This tolerance had limits, however, and the Church implemented increasingly sophisticated measures to monitor and contain potential Templar heresies. In 1229, Pope Gregory IX established the Papal Inquisition, ostensibly to combat Cathar heresy in southern France. Less well documented is the Inquisition's secret mandate to infiltrate the Templar order and report on internal practices. A confidential papal directive discovered among the papers of the Dominican Inquisitor Bernard Gouy instructs inquisitors to place trustworthy men within the Temple Brotherhood who will observe and report without themselves being corrupted. These ecclesiastical spies confirmed the Church's worst fears. Reports sent to Rome throughout the mid-13th century described Templar initiations involving rituals unknown to Christian practice, the veneration of certain objects kept hidden from all but the highest members, and teachings that question the authority of Holy Church to interpret divine mysteries. One particularly alarming report mentions senior Templars discussing the true identity of our Lord, which differs from what is taught to the common faithful. By the end of the 13th century, the Vatican possessed substantial evidence of heterodox beliefs and practices within the Templar order. Yet it took no direct action against them. This restraint likely reflected both continued dependence on Templar services and fear of what the order might reveal if cornered. The Templars' knowledge had become a form of insurance against church interference. A fascinating glimpse into this standoff appears in correspondence between Pope Nicholas IV and Grand Master William de Bussy in 1291. After the fall of Acre marked the end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land, the Pope demanded the transfer of certain sacred objects and texts from Templar repositories to the Vatican Library. The Grand Master's carefully worded reply acknowledges the Pope's authority but explains that these items pertain to the founding mission of our order and cannot be surrendered without betraying our original purpose. This exchange illustrates the unique position the Templars had achieved, able to refuse a direct papal demand without immediate consequences. No other religious order would have dared such defiance. The implications are significant. The Templars possessed knowledge or objects valuable enough to risk papal displeasure, and the Vatican's desire for these items was strong enough to make the demand in the first place. When Philip IV of France moved against the Templars in 1307, the Church faced a crisis. The French king's accusations of heresy, sodomy, and idol worship against the order required papal action. Yet Pope Clement V's initial response was strikingly reluctant. He condemned Philip's arrests as an infringement on church jurisdiction and initially defended the Templars. This reluctance likely reflected more than just concern about royal encroachment on papal prerogatives. Clement, who had his own sources of information about Templar activities, may have feared what might emerge in public trials. If the Templars possessed knowledge that undermined church doctrines or claimed direct spiritual authority, not mediated by the church hierarchy, public exposure would damage more than just the order. The Pope's subsequent reversal, eventually supporting the suppression of the Templars, came after private meetings with Philip IV at which no records were kept. Whatever transpired in these discussions convinced Clement to sacrifice the order, but he did so in a manner suggesting a containment strategy rather than a pursuit of justice. The papal bull Vox in Excelso, which formally dissolved the Templars in 1312, carefully avoided ruling on their guilt or innocence regarding the most serious charges. Instead, it cited the order's damaged reputation as making it impossible for it to continue its mission. This ambiguous language preserved the possibility that individual Templars were innocent while removing the institutional structure that had housed their accumulated knowledge. More telling was the Vatican's handling of Templar archives. While Philip IV's primary interest was Templar wealth, the Church focused on securing their documents, artifacts, and records. Cardinal Berenger Fredel, the Pope's representative, personally supervised the transfer of certain books and objects from major Templar preceptories to the Vatican Library. These items were not entered into the standard library catalog, but placed in what one document calls the repository for matters touching on the faith. The Chinon parchment, rediscovered in the Vatican secret archives in 2001, reveals that Clement V privately absolved the Templar leaders of heresy charges, even as he publicly suppressed the order. This extraordinary document confirms that the Pope recognized a distinction between the order's heterodox knowledge and actual heresy or evil. He evidently believed the Templars had accessed dangerous knowledge without necessarily embracing satanic practices. After the order's dissolution, the Church took extraordinary measures to contain former Templars who might have possessed sensitive knowledge. While most rank-and-file members were assigned to other religious orders, those identified as keepers of Templar secrets received special treatment. Records from the Cistercian Abbey at Pontigny indicate that 7 senior Templars were kept there under a regimen described as perpetual silence, forbidden to speak to anyone outside a small circle of approved contacts. Pope John XXII, who succeeded Clement V, continued this containment policy. In 1317, he issued a confidential directive to all bishops instructing them to report any books, writings, or objects formerly belonging to the Temple Brotherhood that might have escaped official confiscation. The directive specifically mentions accounts of our Lord or his disciples differing from those in Holy Scripture, and stones or vessels alleged to possess special powers. The Vatican's obsession with recovering all Templar knowledge suggests more than routine concern about heresy. The specific categories of items sought, alternative gospels, sacred objects, and records of Temple Mount excavations indicate awareness of discoveries that threatened core Church doctrines or claims to exclusive spiritual authority. Not all this knowledge was successfully contained. Throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, ideas similar to those attributed to the Templars emerged in various forms among the Lollards in England, the Hussites in Bohemia, and eventually in the writings of Protestant reformers. These movements shared key concepts: direct spiritual access without church mediation, criticism of ecclesiastical wealth and corruption, and interest in biblical texts outside the approved canon. The most remarkable evidence of continued Templar influence appears in the explosion of cathedral building that followed their suppression. Gothic architecture reached its zenith in the 14th century, with structures of unprecedented sophistication rising across Europe. Many of the master builders came from regions with strong Templar presence, and their designs incorporated symbols and proportions associated with Templar sacred geometry. Rosslyn Chapel, built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family in Scotland, represents the clearest architectural expression of Templar knowledge traditions. Its intricate carvings combine Christian imagery with symbols from Jewish, Islamic, and pagan traditions. The building incorporates precise mathematical proportions derived from Solomon's temple and includes representations of plants from the Americas decades before Columbus's voyage, suggesting access to knowledge beyond conventional medieval. Sources dot the Church's complex relationship with the Templars reflects deeper tensions within Christianity itself, between institutional authority and direct spiritual experience, between doctrinal certainty and open inquiry, between the desire to preserve spiritual truth and the impulse to control access to it. The Templars embodied these contradictions, serving the Church while simultaneously threatening its foundations through their pursuit of knowledge outside ecclesiastical control. The Vatican's shadow war against Templar knowledge continued long after the order's official suppression. The Index of Forbidden Books, established in the 16th century, listed numerous works reflecting concepts associated with Templar thought. The Church's hostility to Freemasonry, which claimed Templar heritage, likewise suggests continued concern about the persistence of these knowledge traditions. Today, the Vatican's secret archives contain an estimated 85 kilometers of shelving with documents spanning more than 8 centuries. Among these materials are the records of the Templar trials, correspondence between popes and Templar leaders, and reports from ecclesiastical observers who monitored the order throughout its existence. Some remain classified, despite being more than 700 years old. What secrets do these still restricted documents contain? What knowledge did the Templars unearth beneath the Temple Mount that so concerned the medieval church? The answers may lie in those ancient repositories, awaiting future scholars with the patience to piece together one of history's most enduring enigmas, a quest for knowledge so profound that it threatened the very foundations of medieval Christianity. Dawn breaks over the Scottish coastline. The small fishing village of Ely in Fife stirs to life as it has for centuries. Few of its residents know that on a single night in 1307, as autumn winds whipped across the North Sea, 7 ships bearing the Red Cross of the Templars sought refuge in this harbor. They had sailed from La Rochelle in France just hours before King Philip's men arrived to arrest every Templar in his realm. What those ships carried, and where their precious cargo ultimately went, remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. The Templars who fled the French purge did not simply vanish. They left traces across Europe, from Scotland to Portugal, Switzerland to the Baltic shores. These traces suggest not a random scattering of fugitives, but a coordinated effort to preserve both people and possessions, particularly the knowledge and objects that had made their order unique. Scotland provided ideal refuge. Excommunicated by the Pope for supporting Robert the Bruce against English claims, the country was free from papal jurisdiction and hostile to French influence. Scottish records show that many noble families suddenly acquired men of foreign aspect skilled in masonry and other arts. In the years following 1307, these men brought with them advanced architectural knowledge that transformed Scottish building practices. Rosslyn Chapel stands as the most visible embodiment of this Templar architectural legacy. Built by William Sinclair in the 15th century, the chapel incorporates symbolic elements from Jewish, Islamic, and Christian traditions in a synthesis typical of Templar syncretic thinking. Its intricate stonework includes representations of plants native to the Americas, maize and aloe vera, decades before Columbus's voyage. How did the Sinclairs possess knowledge of these New World species? The answer may lie in the final destination of some of those ships from La Rochelle. Historical records confirm Templar naval expertise and their possession of advanced navigational techniques. Their fleet regularly crossed between European and Middle Eastern ports, developing sophisticated maritime knowledge. Legends in both Scotland and Portugal claim that Templar ships reached North American shores long before Columbus, following Viking routes to Nova Scotia and beyond. The Zeno narrative, a controversial 14th century account published in Venice, describes a land called Estateland, reached by fishermen from the Orkney Islands, a Scottish territory with strong Templar connections. The natives of this land allegedly possessed Latin books they could not read and European technologies they had not developed themselves. While scholars debate the document's authenticity, recent archaeological discoveries in Nova Scotia and New England have uncovered European artifacts predating Columbus. More concrete evidence of Templar survival appears in Portugal, where King Dinas refused to suppress the order. Instead, he allowed it to change its name to the Order of Christ and continue operations with most of its personnel and properties intact. This Portuguese branch of the Templars would later sponsor the voyages of discovery that opened the age of exploration, with their distinctive cross emblazoned on the sails of ships, including those commanded by Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan. Prince Henry the Navigator, who led Portugal's exploration efforts, was Grand Master of the Order of Christ and had access to its archives. His headquarters at Sagres contained what contemporaries described as charts of remarkable accuracy, showing lands beyond the known world. Maritime historians have long puzzled over the source of Portuguese navigational knowledge that allowed their tiny nation to dominate early exploration. The Templar connection provides a compelling explanation. Switzerland, too, bears the imprint of Templar influence. The Swiss Confederation emerged as a political entity in the early 14th century, precisely when Templars were fleeing persecution elsewhere in Europe. The Swiss flag, a white cross on a red field, inverts the Templar battle standard. Swiss banking practices, including numbered accounts and strict secrecy, mirror Templar financial innovations. Even Swiss neutrality reflects the Templar principle of standing apart from secular political conflicts. The Templars' most valuable possessions, however, were not their gold or lands, but their knowledge archives and sacred objects. What happened to these treasures after the suppression? Multiple lines of evidence suggest deliberate concealment in locations across Europe, with information about these repositories restricted to a small circle of trusted guardians. Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia presents one of the most persistent mysteries potentially connected to Templar treasure. This small island contains an elaborately engineered shaft over 100 feet deep, constructed with sophisticated flood traps that have frustrated excavation attempts for centuries. Dendrochronological dating places the shaft's construction in the late 13th or early 14th century, precisely when Templars were seeking secure locations for their treasures. In southern France, the mystery of Rennes-le-Château has similar Templar connections. In 1891, the village priest Berenger Saunier discovered hidden documents while renovating his church, a building with historical Templar associations. Whatever these documents contained transformed Saunier from an impoverished rural priest to a man of substantial wealth. His subsequent architectural projects incorporated Templar symbols and proportions, suggesting his discovery connected to their hidden legacy. The most tantalizing evidence of Templar treasures comes from the Chartres Cathedral manuscript known as the Parchment of Chinon. This document, independent of the Vatican's Chinon parchment, contains a coded message referring to that which was removed from the temple, being secured in 5 repositories across the seas and mountains. The manuscript includes geometric figures that some researchers believe represent star patterns, marking these locations. What specific treasures might these repositories contain? Historical sources mention several possibilities beyond gold and silver. The head of Baphomet features prominently in Templar trial testimonies. While presented by accusers as evidence of devil worship, this object may have been something entirely different. Some scholars identify it with the Shroud of Turin, first publicly displayed in 1357 in France by Geoffrey de Charny, whose uncle was the Templar preceptor of Normandy, burned alongside Jacques de Molay. The shroud bears the negative image of a man's head and body, which could explain descriptions of the bearded head Templars allegedly venerated. The Templar fleet reportedly carried numerous sacred relics from the Holy Land as Jerusalem fell to Muslim forces. These included fragments of the true cross, vials of Christ's blood, and pieces of the crown of thorns, objects of immense spiritual significance in medieval Christianity. While many such relics appeared in European churches in the centuries following the Crusades, the provenance of these objects was often deliberately obscured to protect their Templar origins. Most significant would be any artifacts connected to the Temple Mount excavations, objects from the original Temple of Solomon that might include fragments of the Ark of the Covenant or vessels from temple worship. Jewish traditions maintained that certain sacred implements were hidden before the Babylonian conquest. If the Templars discovered any such objects, they would have recognized their tremendous religious and political significance. Beyond physical treasures, the Templars possessed extensive archives of knowledge. Their library at Paris contained thousands of manuscripts in multiple languages, including texts from ancient sources unavailable elsewhere in Europe. While many documents were seized during the suppression, evidence suggests the most important manuscripts were evacuated before the arrests. Asterisk. These knowledge repositories likely included architectural principles derived from Solomon's Temple, navigational information gathered during centuries of Mediterranean shipping, financial systems that anticipated modern banking, and medical knowledge from Arabic and Jewish sources. This practical knowledge, rather than gold or supernatural relics, may have been the Templars' most valuable legacy. How was this legacy transmitted after the order's official dissolution? Evidence points to several channels through which Templar knowledge survived. In Scotland, the sudden emergence of speculative Freemasonry in the late 16th century incorporated symbols, rituals, and organizational structures strikingly similar to those attributed to the Templars. The earliest Masonic lodges appeared in regions with documented Templar presence, and early Masonic ritual texts contain phrases identical to those in Templar initiation ceremonies. This suggests not merely inspiration, but direct transmission. The Rosicrucian movement, which appeared mysteriously in early 17th century Germany, likewise shows Templar influence in its synthesis of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic esoteric traditions. The founding Rosicrucian manifestos describe a secret brotherhood dedicated to preserving ancient wisdom, precisely the role the Templars had played. The movement's symbol of a rose upon a cross echoes the Templar red cross, while adding alchemical dimensions. More directly, the Portuguese Order of Christ and the Spanish Order of Montesa, both created to absorb Templar personnel and properties, preserved elements of Templar tradition within officially sanctioned structures. These orders maintained Libraries containing Templar manuscripts and continued practices developed during the Templar period, particularly in navigation and architecture. Physical evidence of this hidden legacy continues to emerge in unexpected places. In 2001, renovations at a 12th century church in Shropshire, England revealed a cache of documents sealed within a wall cavity. Among them was a floor plan of the Temple Mount showing substructures not documented in any other medieval source. The papers were accompanied by a Templar seal and coins minted in Jerusalem during their occupation. Similarly, a farmer plowing fields near the former Templar preceptory at Baldic in 2018 unearthed a metal container holding parchment fragments written in a cipher similar to known Templar encryption systems. Preliminary decoding suggests the text describes locations of other document repositories across Europe, potentially providing new avenues for understanding the Templar information network, perhaps the most significant aspect of the Templars. Hidden legacy lies not in specific treasures or texts, but in the paradigm shift they initiated in European thought. Their integration of knowledge from Jewish, Islamic, and Eastern Christian sources challenged the intellectual monopoly of the Roman Church. Their financial innovations undermined feudal economic structures. Their meritocratic organization offered an alternative to hereditary power systems. This intellectual revolution, more than gold or relics, represents the true treasure the Templars scattered across Europe as their order faced destruction. They seeded ideas that would flower during the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment, ideas about direct spiritual experience, the value of ancient wisdom, and the power of human reason to understand the divine order. The enduring fascination with Templar secrets reflects an intuitive recognition of their role as bearers of transformative knowledge. Behind the popular myths of buried gold and supernatural relics lies a deeper truth. Templars possessed not merely treasures, but a vision of human potential and divine reality that transcended the limitations of medieval orthodoxy. This vision did not die with Jacques de Molay on his Parisian pyre. It lives in the soaring geometry of Gothic cathedrals, in the precision of Renaissance art and science, in the voyages that open new worlds, and in philosophical traditions that continue to challenge institutional authority in favor of direct personal understanding. The Templars' most profound legacy may be the concept of esoteric transmission itself, the idea that certain knowledge must be preserved through changing times by networks of trusted individuals operating beyond the constraints of conventional power structures. This invisible college approach to wisdom would influence intellectual movements from the scientific revolution through the Enlightenment to the present day. As dawn breaks over Ely Harbor, the ghosts of those Templar ships remain not as spectral vessels, but as ideas and innovations that transformed the world. Their cargo was not merely gold or sacred objects, but a vision of human potential that continues to unfold across the centuries. A hidden legacy waiting for those with eyes to see and minds to understand. In the shadow of Bannockburn, where Robert the Bruce defeated English forces in 1314 with the alleged assistance of mysterious knights bearing the Templar cross, a question echoes across 7 centuries. Why do the Knights Templar continue to capture our imagination when other medieval orders have faded into historical footnotes? The answer lies not merely in what the Templars may have found beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount, but in what they represent, the eternal human quest for hidden knowledge, for direct connection with the divine, for truths that transcend dogma and institutional authority. Their story embodies the tension between the search for wisdom and the power structures that seek to control it. Their enduring presence in our cultural consciousness reflects something deeper than historical interest. The Templars have become archetypes, symbols of the seeker who glimpses mysteries beyond conventional understanding and pays the price for that forbidden knowledge. Their dramatic rise and fall encapsulates a pattern repeated throughout human history, from Prometheus stealing fire from the gods to modern whistleblowers, exposing hidden truths. The myths surrounding the Templars, the Ark, the Grail, forbiddens. Gospels, sacred bloodlines cannot be dismissed simply as historical fantasies. These narratives contain psychological and spiritual truths that resonate across centuries. They speak to our intuitive sense that conventional histories and official doctrines tell only part of the story, that beneath the surface of accepted reality lie deeper currents of meaning and power. Consider the persistent legends of the Ark, of the Covenant. Whether or not the Templars actually discovered this biblical relic, the Ark symbolizes the human desire to connect directly with divine power, to bypass priestly intermediaries and institutional structures. The Ark represents unmediated spiritual authority, the direct presence of the divine accessible to those pure enough to approach it. This symbolic meaning transcends the physical object itself. Similarly, the Holy Grail mythology that flourished during the Templar era reflects more than a search for a physical cup. The Grail represents transformation, the vessel that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary, that heals what is broken, that bridges heaven and earth. As a symbol, it embodies the alchemical potential within each person to transmute base experience into spiritual gold. The Grail quest is ultimately an interior journey, disguised as an external search. The forbidden Gospels and alternative Christian texts the Templars allegedly discovered speak to our recognition that dominant narratives often suppress inconvenient truths. These texts, many now recovered through modern archaeological discoveries, remind us that Christianity's early history contained more diversity and complexity than orthodox accounts acknowledge. They validate our intuitive sense that what survived as official history was determined as much by power as by truth. Perhaps most compelling is the legend of a sacred bloodline, the suggestion that the Templars protected descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, preserving a living heritage rather than merely ancient objects. This narrative touches something primal in human consciousness, the desire for direct connection to foundational spiritual figures, the hope that divine wisdom continues to incarnate in human form rather than remaining locked in ancient texts. These myths persist not because they can be historically verified, but because they express truths about human spirituality and psychology that transcend literal facts. They articulate our suspicion that institutional religion often serves to control access to the divine rather than facilitate it, that political power frequently suppresses knowledge rather than nurturing it, and that the most profound truths may be preserved outside official channels. The Templars themselves understood the power of myth and symbol. Their architectural works, from churches to castles, incorporate symbolic elements that communicate on multiple levels simultaneously. The round churches they built throughout Europe echo both the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and the octagonal dome of the rock that stood above the ruins of Solomon's Temple. These structures speak a symbolic language intended to connect visitors with sacred realities beyond ordinary perception. This symbolic consciousness appears throughout Templar-influenced art and architecture. The labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, constructed during the height of Templar influence, represents not merely a meditative path, but a map of initiation similar to those found in mystery traditions across cultures. The carved symbols at Rosslyn Chapel combine Christian imagery with motifs from Jewish, Islamic, and pagan sources in a visual symphony of spiritual integration. Modern research continues to uncover physical evidence connecting the Templars to various mystery traditions. Templar preceptories across Europe were constructed according to precise geometric principles relating to sacred sites in Jerusalem. Many incorporate astronomical alignments marking solstices and equinoxes, knowledge typically associated with older pagan traditions rather than medieval Christianity. The persistence of Templar symbolism in later movements, from Freemasonry to Rosicrucianism to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, suggests a continuous transmission of certain core ideas about the nature of reality and humanity's place within it. These movements preserve not only specific symbols and rituals, but a fundamental approach to knowledge as something to be experienced rather than merely believed. This experiential approach to spiritual wisdom, emphasizing direct personal understanding over institutional authority, represents perhaps the most significant aspect of the Templar legacy. In an age dominated by hierarchical power structures and dogmatic theology, the Templars created spaces where alternative modes of knowing could flourish. Their libraries contained works from diverse traditions that emphasize the individual's capacity for direct spiritual insight. The suppression of the Templars thus represents more than just a king's greed or a pope's fear. It embodies the perennial conflict between institutional power and individual spiritual freedom, between controlled narratives and open inquiry, between dogma and direct experience. This conflict continues to resonate in our own time, as established power structures still work to control access to information and experience that might challenge their authority. Yet the Templar story also offers hope. Despite the Order's official destruction, their ideas, their symbols, and perhaps even their treasures survived, preserved by networks of committed individuals operating beyond institutional control. This pattern of preservation and transmission continues to inspire those who value wisdom traditions that exist outside mainstream channels. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide tantalizing glimpses of potential Templar knowledge. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, confirm the existence of Jewish religious communities with beliefs and practices that align remarkably well with elements of Templar thought. The Nag Hammadi Library, found in Egypt in 1945, revealed the actual texts of alternative gospels similar to those the Templars were accused of possessing. Modern technology allows new approaches to old mysteries. Ground-penetrating radar has identified previously unknown chambers beneath the Temple Mount that align with medieval Templar descriptions of their excavation sites. Digital analysis of Templar architectural proportions reveals mathematical relationships, suggesting knowledge of principles only rediscovered during the Renaissance. Spectroscopic examination of Templar artifacts has identified materials with unexpected origins, including metals from sources not documented in conventional medieval trade. The 21st century has also brought renewed interest in the practical knowledge systems the Templars developed. Their banking innovations anticipated modern financial instruments by centuries. Their architectural and engineering achievements demonstrated mathematical precision beyond contemporary European capabilities. Their navigational techniques suggested knowledge of global geography supposedly unknown in medieval Europe. This practical dimension of Templar knowledge reminds us that the line between the mystical and the practical, the spiritual and the scientific, is largely a modern construction. For the Templars, architectural proportions derived from Solomon's temple were both mathematically precise building instructions and channels for divine energy. Their financial systems were simultaneously practical solutions to commerce problems and expressions of philosophical principles about the nature of value and exchange. The integration of knowledge from diverse traditions, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and possibly older sources, represents one of the Templars' most significant contributions. At a time when European culture was largely isolated and inward-looking, they created networks of communication and exchange that transmitted ideas across religious and cultural boundaries. This cross-fertilization of knowledge systems created the conditions for the intellectual flowering of the Renaissance. Even the accusations leveled against the Templars during their trials revealed their revolutionary potential. They were charged with denying that priests had special powers, with believing that ordinary members could absolve sins, with questioning the divinity of Christ, and with venerating nature rather than the cross. These heresies anticipated key elements of the Protestant Reformation and even Enlightenment thinking: the elevation of individual conscience over institutional authority, and the recognition of divine presence in nature itself. As we reflect on the Templar legacy from our vantage point in the 21st century, perhaps the most relevant aspect of their story is not what specific treasures or knowledge they may have possessed, but how they maintained independence of thought in an age of conformity. They created spaces, physical, intellectual, and spiritual, where exploration beyond the boundaries of orthodox thinking became possible. This legacy of intellectual and spiritual freedom continues to inspire. From alternative scholarly communities to preservation efforts for indigenous wisdom traditions to the open source movement in technology, contemporary culture contains numerous examples of knowledge being preserved and developed outside institutional channels. These modern efforts echo the Templar approach to wisdom as something to be shared among networks of trusted individuals rather than controlled by hierarchical authorities. The enduring fascination with Templar mysteries, whether focused on buried treasure, sacred relics, or esoteric knowledge, reflects our intuitive recognition that conventional historical narratives leave much untold. The spaces between documented facts often contain the most significant truths. The Templars inhabited these liminal spaces, operating at the boundaries between religions, between cultures, between the sacred and the secular. Their story reminds us that history is not a closed book, but a continuing conversation between past and present. The questions they explored about the nature of spiritual authority, the relationship between ancient wisdom and new discovery, the tension between individual insight and institutional power remain profoundly relevant. Their quest continues. Through all who seek truth beyond conventional boundaries as evening shadows lengthen across the ruins of Templar preceptories scattered throughout Europe and the Middle East, we are left not with answers, but with questions, and perhaps this is their greatest legacy. The Templars challenge us to look beyond surface narratives, to question received wisdom, to recognize that the most profound truths often lie hidden, waiting for those with the courage and discernment to discover them. Were they merely soldiers who became bankers, victims of royal greed and political circumstance? Or were they guardians of a tradition that traced back to Solomon's temple and forward to the modern age, keepers of knowledge, too powerful for medieval institutions to control? The answer may lie not in dusty archives or archaeological digs, but in the continuing human quest for wisdom that transcends dogma, for direct experience of truths that institutional structures often obscure. The true Templar treasure, whether it took the form of the Ark, the Grail, forbidden texts, or practical knowledge, was never merely gold or sacred objects. It was a vision of human potential unbounded by conventional limitations, a recognition of wisdom's presence in diverse traditions, and a commitment to preserving knowledge through changing times for those prepared to receive it. This treasure was not buried in a single vault, but scattered across landscapes both physical and cultural, in architectural proportions and musical harmonies, in banking systems and navigational charts, in symbolic imagery and ritual practices. It lives wherever people value wisdom above dogma, experience above authority, and the quest for understanding above the comfort of certainty. The Knights Templar may have vanished as a formal order, but their spirit persists in all who recognize that the most profound mysteries are not problems to be solved, but realities to be experienced, that behind the visible world lies another dimension of meaning, accessible to those with the preparation to perceive it. Perhaps this is why their story continues to haunt us. In the Templars, we recognize not merely historical figures, but archetypes of the eternal human journey from darkness to light, from ignorance to understanding, from the outer courts of conventional knowledge to the inner sanctum of wisdom. Their quest is our quest, their story our story, their mysteries our own.